Rain slicks the empty street. A lone man stands under a bus shelter, hood pulled low. A patrol car eases out of the dark, tires hissing over wet pavement, slowing to a crawl. This same scene plays out on street corners across the country almost every night. But this time, the officer behind the wheel picked the wrong stranger to stop. He thought he'd caught an ordinary man matching a vague description. He had no idea he was about to detain one of the federal government's top civil rights prosecutors. This is the story of a shattered badge, a buried career, and a $3.5 million settlement. Malcolm Reeves was 44 years old, and he was in the middle of building one of the biggest cases of his career. As a federal prosecutor, he was 3 days from arguing a major case against a police officer accused of an unlawful shooting. That night, he sat alone in his office, long after his staff had gone home, surrounded by case files and framed thank you letters from city leaders. The judge set to hear his case had put dirty cops behind bars before, and everyone in the room would know exactly who Malcolm was the moment he walked in. His name alone carried weight in every precinct in the district. When he finally packed up to leave, he walked down to the parking deck and found his sedan sitting on a flat front tire. The federal government could take down crooked police units and put criminals away for life. It could not, it turned out, produce a spare tire out of thin air. Malcolm called the dealership's roadside service right away, standing in the cold, empty garage with rain tapping on the concrete somewhere above him. The woman on the phone told him the wait would be at least 90 minutes, maybe longer, with the storm moving through the city. He leaned against his car and thought it over. He had a big meeting at 7 the next morning, and he had no interest in sitting alone in a dark parking deck until midnight just to watch a stranger change a tire. He checked the bus app on his phone. The next bus was only a few blocks away, and it would drop him 2 stops from his own front door. It was an easy choice, really. Nothing dramatic about it. Just a tired man making a smart, simple call after a long day at work. He sent his wife a quick text to let her know he'd be running a little late, grabbed his gym bag off the back seat, and locked up his car for the night. The garage lights buzzed faintly above him as he walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing off the bare concrete walls. Outside, the rain had settled into a steady, quiet drizzle. Malcolm pulled his hood up and started walking toward the bus stop on the corner, 3 blocks from the federal building. He didn't think twice about it. Taking the bus was something he'd done 100 times before, back before his career had taken off, back when a badge and a title were still years away. Tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, he was just another tired man trying to get home. Malcolm hadn't planned on walking around the city in a suit that night. Earlier in the day, expecting to squeeze in a late workout before heading home, he had changed out of his work clothes and into a plain grey hoodie, black joggers, and a worn pair of running shoes. His suit jacket, his tie, and his crisp dress shirt were folded neatly inside his briefcase, tucked away in the back seat of his car. He hadn't given it a second thought at the time. It was just something he did most Tuesdays, a small habit built into his packed schedule. Standing at the bus stop now, hood pulled low against the rain, gym bag slung across his shoulder, there was nothing about him that hinted at who he really was. No badge, no title, no sharp suit to signal power or authority. He looked exactly like what he appeared to be on the surface, a tired man in workout clothes, waiting for a late bus on a wet street corner. There was nothing unusual about it, and that was the whole point. Every single night, all across the country, men who held real power walked around looking just like everyone else. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, prosecutors. Strip away the suit, the office, the framed commendations on the wall, and what was left was just a person standing in the rain like anyone else. Malcolm didn't know it yet, but that plain grey hoodie was about to change everything. Tonight, he wasn't the deputy chief of a federal division. Tonight, he was just a hooded stranger standing alone in the dark, and that was exactly how the next few hours would unfold. The corner was quiet, almost too quiet for a city this size. A single street lamp buzzed above the bus shelter, flickering every few seconds and throwing Malcolm's shadow in short, stuttering bursts across the wet pavement. Rain blurred the storefronts across the street into smudges of dim light and dark glass. No other pedestrians were out. No cars idled at the curb. Just Malcolm, standing under a cracked plexiglass roof that barely kept the drizzle off his shoulders. He pulled his phone out and checked the bus tracker again. The app showed the same message it had shown 2 minutes earlier: delayed, arriving soon. He let out a small breath and shoved his phone back into his pocket, shifting his weight to stay warm. His hood stayed up, mostly out of habit, partly to keep the rain off his neck. He glanced up the street every so often, watching for headlights that hadn't shown up yet. There was nothing strange about any of it. He wasn't pacing, he wasn't looking over his shoulder, he wasn't fidgeting with his hands or acting like a man with something to hide. He was simply a tired commuter doing what tired commuters do every single night in cities all over the country, standing still, waiting, checking a phone, hoping a late bus would finally show up. The rain kept falling in a steady, quiet rhythm, tapping against the shelter's roof. Somewhere behind him, a set of headlights turned onto the avenue, moving slowly through the wet street. Malcolm didn't notice right away. He was still watching his phone, still waiting, still doing nothing wrong at all. 3 blocks away, Officer Grant Sutter sat behind the wheel of his patrol car, nursing a cup of gas station coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. 14 years on the force had earned him a badge, a pension he worried about losing, and not much else. He'd been passed over for sergeant twice, both times watching younger officers move up the ranks while he stayed exactly where he started. Right now, he was under internal review, thanks to a growing stack of citizen complaints that his captain had finally stopped ignoring. His lieutenant had made it clear that his numbers needed to improve, and fast. A string of catalytic converter thefts had hit the neighborhood over the past month, and the pressure from above was starting to feel personal. Dispatch had put out a description of the suspect not long ago, and it was about as useless as descriptions came. Black male, medium build, wearing a hoodie. On a rainy night in a city of 500,000 people, that description could have matched thousands of men walking home from work. Sutter wasn't thinking about any of that, though. He wasn't thinking about how many innocent men fit that same vague outline. He was thinking about his review, his stalled career, and how badly he needed a win before his lieutenant lost patience with him completely. He needed an arrest, any arrest. Something to put in his report that made him look sharp, proactive, useful. He turned his cruiser onto the avenue, scanning the empty sidewalks through the rain-streaked windshield, looking for anyone who might fit the bill. That's when he saw him, a lone figure in a hoodie, standing under a bus shelter up ahead. The cruiser slowed to a crawl, tires hissing softly through the standing water on the road. Malcolm heard it before he saw it, the low rumble of an engine easing off the gas. He looked up from his phone just as a spotlight snapped on, flooding the bus shelter in a hard white light. He squinted and raised one gloved hand to shield his eyes, more out of reflex than anything else. No words had been spoken yet, no siren, just the light, the slow crawl of the car, and the quiet tension that settled over the corner like a held breath. Malcolm felt no fear in that moment, only a flicker of mild irritation, and the automatic, careful thinking of a man who had spent his whole career studying moments exactly like this one. He ran through the facts in his head, calm and clear, the same way he would review a case file. A marked police car. A spotlight aimed his way, no words exchanged yet, and no clear reason given for any of it. At most, this was the very beginning of an investigative stop, and stops like this required something more than just a man standing quietly at a bus shelter. They required real, specific suspicion, not a vague hunch and a hoodie. He didn't move. He didn't reach for anything. He simply stood there, hands still visible, waiting to see what the officer would say and do next. Whatever came out of that cruiser, Malcolm intended to meet it the same way he met everything else in his professional life, with patience, with calm, and with a clear head. Sutter stepped out of the cruiser, boots splashing through the wet gutter, one hand resting on his belt near his holster. "Let me see your hands," he called out, his voice sharp and already impatient. Malcolm raised his palms, open and empty, and stepped forward into the light without any rush. "Evening, officer," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm just waiting on the next bus. Is there a problem?" Sutter closed the distance between them, clearly not impressed by how relaxed Malcolm sounded. "We've had thefts in this area lately," he said. "You match the description that came over dispatch. I need to see some ID." Malcolm thought it over, the way he thought over everything, weighing the request on its actual merits, not the tone behind it. "Before I hand over any identification," he said, "can you tell me what specific reason you have to stop me tonight?" "There's a legal standard for this. It comes from a case called Terry versus Ohio. An officer needs a real reason to believe a crime has happened, is happening, or is about to happen. Standing at a bus stop, by itself, isn't enough." The words landed exactly wrong. Sutter's jaw tightened and his whole posture shifted from annoyed to something closer to angry, all in the space of a few seconds. "I don't need a legal lecture from you," he snapped. "You fit the description. Give me your ID, or I'm taking you in for obstruction. Your choice." Malcolm held his ground, his voice never rising above a calm, even tone. "I understand you believe you're doing your job," he said. "But I'm declining to give you my ID right now, and I'd like to know one thing. Am I free to go?" Malcolm had every right, in that exact moment, to reach into his gym bag, pull out his credentials, and end the whole thing in seconds. One glance at that gold badge, and Sutter's tone would flip instantly from hostile to apologetic. He knew this. He'd seen it happen 100 times to other people with badges of their own, but he didn't reach for it. He kept his hands right where they were, open and steady at his sides. He had a reason for that choice, and it wasn't pride. If he pulled out his credentials now, this whole encounter would end the second Sutter saw his title, and nothing about what was actually happening would ever come to light. The system would quietly protect itself the way it always did, one polite apology at a time, and Sutter would drive off with a story about almost stopping a federal prosecutor by mistake, nothing more. Malcolm wanted to see this through as exactly what he appeared to be tonight, an ordinary man in a hoodie, standing at a bus stop, with no title and no badge to shield him. He wanted to know, without any protection at all, how far an officer like Sutter was really willing to go on a rainy Tuesday night. If he flashed his credentials now, he would never actually find out. So he stood there, calm and quiet, letting the moment play out exactly the way it would for anyone else standing in his shoes. Whatever happened next, he intended to let it happen honestly, without his rank stepping in early to change the outcome. Down the block, a pair of headlights turned onto the avenue, cutting through the rain in two steady beams. Malcolm caught the shape of it right away, the tall, boxy outline of a city bus rolling closer through the wet street. The brakes let out a soft, distant hiss as it slowed for the next stop. For one brief moment, something in Malcolm's chest loosened, just slightly. He let himself think, for just a second, that this whole thing might end the simple, ordinary way it should have ended from the start. The bus would pull up, the doors would open. He would step past Sutter, climb aboard, and ride the rest of the way home like any other tired passenger. No paperwork, no headlines, just a strange, unpleasant memory from a rainy Tuesday, the kind of thing he might mention to his wife over dinner and then forget by the weekend. It was a small, grounded kind of hope, nothing dramatic, nothing he would have even called hope out loud, just the quiet, human instinct to believe that most nights end the way they're supposed to. The bus kept rolling closer, its headlights growing brighter against the wet pavement, its engine humming low and steady through the rain. Malcolm didn't move yet. He stood exactly where he was, hands still open at his sides, watching the bus close the distance between them. Whatever this night was about to become, for just a moment, it still felt like it might end the easy way. "You're not going anywhere," Sutter growled, and before Malcolm could say another word, Sutter grabbed his arm and shoved him hard into the plexiglass wall of the shelter. The impact knocked the breath out of him, his cheek pressed flat against the cold, wet glass. "Stop resisting," Sutter barked, loud and sharp, the kind of phrase aimed less at Malcolm and more at the small camera clipped to his own chest. "I am not resisting," Malcolm said, just as loud, his voice clear and steady despite the pain in his chest. He made sure every word landed cleanly, made sure the camera and anyone nearby could hear him say it plainly. He didn't tense up. He didn't pull away. He let his whole body go still and limp, giving Sutter nothing at all to point to later. No excuse, no story about a struggle that never happened. Through the fogged glass of the shelter, he saw the bus finally roll to a stop at the curb, its doors hissing open right on time. Two passengers froze mid-step in the doorway, staring out at the scene in front of them, an officer pinning a man against a bus shelter in the pouring rain. The bus driver leaned forward over the wheel, eyes wide, unsure whether to pull off or stay put. Sutter kicked Malcolm's legs apart and patted him down with more force than the moment called for, hands rough and quick. Cold metal cuffs snapped around Malcolm's wrists a second later, biting into his skin with a sharp, sudden pinch. Malcolm didn't fight any of it. He simply stood there, soaked through, wrists aching, completely still, letting every single passenger on that bus become a witness to exactly what was happening to him. In the back of the cruiser, soaked through and handcuffed, Malcolm didn't waste a single second feeling sorry for himself. His mind shifted into the same sharp, careful mode he used every day at work, the part of him that built cases out of small, quiet details other people overlooked. He looked up at Sutter's vest through the metal cage between them and read the badge number twice to make sure it stuck. 4471. He glanced at the digital clock glowing on the dashboard, 9:47 p.m., and repeated it silently in his head until it felt locked in place. He pictured the street signs from the corner where the whole thing started, holding onto the exact cross streets, the same way he would hold onto a key piece of evidence in any other case. Every detail mattered. Every single one of them would matter later. Up front, Sutter picked up his radio, keyed it, and reported in with the loose, easy tone of a man who thought he'd just closed out a good night's work. "Got one matching the description from earlier," he said. "Uncooperative, transport for booking." Malcolm caught every word of it, repeating the phrase back to himself in his head, word for word, exactly the way Sutter had said it. Sutter drove on through the rain, humming faintly under his breath, clearly pleased with himself, completely unaware of what was sitting quietly behind him. He had no idea that the man in his back seat wasn't panicking or plotting revenge. He was simply building a case, one small, exact detail at a time, the same way he'd built dozens of cases before. At the precinct, Sutter marched Malcolm through a set of heavy double doors and into a bright, loud booking area that smelled like old coffee and cleaning fluid. A tired desk sergeant sat behind a raised counter, typing without much interest, barely glancing up as Sutter dropped Malcolm's gym bag onto the counter with a heavy thud. The zipper came open, and his things spilled out one by one. His phone, his keys, a folded grey towel, his wallet. The sergeant logged each item slowly, calling them out under his breath as he typed. One phone, one set of keys, one wallet. He didn't look at Malcolm's face once. To him, this was just another late-night booking, one more name to add to a long list before his shift finally ended. Name, the sergeant said flatly, still staring at his screen. Malcolm met his eyes for the first time and said only, "I am invoking my right to remain silent. I want my phone call." He didn't explain who he was. He didn't mention his job, his title, or anything about the office he walked into every single morning. He simply repeated the one sentence he knew the law fully protected, and then he said nothing more. Off to the side, Sutter crossed his arms and muttered something under his breath about amateur lawyers, clearly annoyed that Malcolm still wasn't rattled. Malcolm let the comment pass without a reaction, standing quietly at the counter, soaked, handcuffed, and completely silent, watching every small step of the process unfold exactly the way it was supposed to, waiting for the moment he already knew was coming. The sergeant kept working through the property list, still bored, still moving on autopilot. He picked up the gym bag again, checking it for a hidden pocket, hoping to find some kind of ID card that would save him the trouble of a difficult intake. His fingers found a small zipper tucked inside the main compartment, one Malcolm rarely used. He pulled it open without much thought and reached inside. His hand came out holding a slim leather wallet, thicker and heavier than a normal one, closed with a small brass snap. He popped it open, expecting a driver's license or maybe a work badge from some office job. Instead, a gold shield caught the fluorescent light overhead, gleaming bright against the dull counter. Above it, stamped in bold letters, were the words, "United States Department of Justice." The sergeant's breath caught in his throat. His eyes moved to the identification card beside the shield, and his whole body went still. A photo of Malcolm stared back at him, next to a title that made his stomach drop. Assistant United States Attorney, Deputy Chief, Civil Rights Division. His hands began to shake, just slightly at first, then more. The color drained from his face in real time, like someone had reached inside and pulled it out through his skin. He looked up at Malcolm, then back down at the badge, then up again, as if checking to see if the photo would somehow change. It didn't. The clipboard he'd been holding slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the counter, loud enough that a few heads turned across the room. The sergeant didn't say a word to Malcolm. He grabbed the shift supervisor by the arm and pulled him a few steps away, shoving the open wallet into his hands with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. The supervisor looked down at the gold shield, then at the ID card, and his face shifted from mild confusion to open dread in the space of a few seconds. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, already reaching for his radio. He paged the watch commander immediately, his voice tight and clipped, asking him to come to the front desk right away. When the watch commander arrived and saw the badge for himself, his reaction was worse than the supervisor's had been. He didn't say much at all. He simply pulled out his phone, walked a few steps away for privacy, and dialed the precinct captain's number with hands that weren't entirely steady either. The captain picked up just after 1 in the morning, his voice groggy and annoyed at first, then sharp and alert the moment he understood what he was being told. He didn't ask many questions. He didn't need to. Within minutes, he was pulling on his jacket and heading out the door, leaving his half-asleep house behind him. By 2 in the morning, his unmarked SUV pulled into the precinct lot, emergency lights still flashing from the drive over. He climbed out fast, tie loose around his neck, jacket only half-buttoned, moving with the kind of urgency reserved for exactly one kind of night, the kind that could end a career before sunrise. The captain walked straight back to the holding cell, keys shaking slightly in his hand as he unlocked the heavy door. "Mr. Reeves," he said, his voice careful and strained, "there's been a serious mistake tonight, and I'm opening this door right now. I want to offer my department's sincere apology for what happened to you." Malcolm stood up slowly, but he didn't move toward the open door. "Captain," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I'm not interested in walking out of here quietly. What happened tonight was an unlawful seizure. It was a false arrest. And it was excessive force under a federal law, Section 242, that makes it a crime for someone acting under a badge to violate a person's rights on purpose." Unquote. The captain's face tightened, but he didn't argue. "I want the full booking log from tonight," Malcolm continued, "with an accurate timestamp, not one that's been cleaned up after the fact. I want the property receipt showing exactly what was taken from me and exactly when, and I want the dispatch recording preserved tonight, unedited, before anyone gets the chance to lose it or explain it away." The captain nodded slowly, fully aware that refusing any of it would only make things far worse for him and his department. "I'll make sure all of it is preserved," he said, "tonight." Malcolm studied him for a long moment, reading the fear behind his careful, polite tone, and then finally stepped forward, out of the cell, wrists still raw from the handcuffs, ready to make sure none of tonight would simply disappear. The next morning, Malcolm sat across from the U.S. attorney in her office, laying out every detail of the night before, in the same clear, careful order he used in every case he built. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing angrier with each new detail, until finally she set down her pen and shook her head. "I'll make one phone call," she said. "The chief will fire this officer quietly by the end of the week. We handle it, and it's done." Malcolm shook his head before she even finished. "If we handle it that way," he said, "Officer Sutter loses his job, the department puts out a short statement, and that's the end of it. Nothing actually changes. Somewhere down the road, another officer treats someone else the exact same way, and there's no record of any of this, no real accountability, nothing on paper that forces anyone to fix the pattern." She studied him for a moment, arms crossed, clearly weighing his words against the easier path sitting right in front of her. "You understand this becomes a much bigger fight if you push it further," she said. Malcolm nodded. "I do, and I still want it out in the open. Quiet fixes protect the department. They don't protect the next person standing at that same bus stop." She was quiet for a long moment, then finally nodded, her jaw tight. Malcolm told her he intended to bring in outside counsel and pursue the full case, not as a personnel issue buried in paperwork, but as exactly what it was, a serious civil rights violation the public deserved to know about. Within a few days, Malcolm had reached out to one of the most respected civil rights lawyers in the country, a woman known for taking on big departments and winning. She agreed to take the case almost immediately, telling him plainly that what happened at that bus stop was exactly the kind of pattern she'd spent her whole career trying to stop. While she began building the case, the police union sensed trouble coming and moved fast to protect its own. A story quietly made its way to local reporters, claiming Malcolm had matched a suspect description that night and had resisted a lawful stop. It painted him as difficult, uncooperative, maybe even guilty of something, without ever mentioning the badge found in his gym bag or the handcuffs left marks on his wrists. It was the same tired story departments always told, and it usually worked. This time, it didn't get very far. While that story spread through a few local outlets, Malcolm's legal team was already working quietly behind the scenes, gathering something the department hadn't thought to control. They subpoenaed Marta's own bus stop security camera, a source that had nothing to do with the police department at all. It was an independent system, time-stamped and untouched, sitting there the whole time, recording everything from an angle no officer could edit or explain away later. Malcolm knew exactly what that footage would show. He'd been standing right there. He'd felt every second of it happen. Now, for the first time, the world was about to see it too, in a way no leaked story could talk its way around. 2 weeks later, Malcolm's attorney stood on the courthouse steps in front of a wall of cameras, reporters packed shoulder to shoulder with microphones raised. Behind her, a large screen had been set up, ready to play something the department clearly hadn't expected the public to ever see. "The department has spent the last 2 weeks telling a story," she said, her voice carrying easily across the crowd. "Today, we're going to show you the truth instead." She hit play, and the Marta footage rolled across the screen in full view of every camera pointed at her. It showed Malcolm standing calmly under the shelter, hands open, nothing furtive about him at all. It showed Sutter approaching fast, grabbing his arm without warning, slamming him into the plexiglass wall. Reporters gasped audibly as the video played, some of them lowering their phones, just to watch it with their own eyes. Frame by frame, the footage tore apart everything the union's story had claimed, showing no resistance, no struggle, nothing that matched their version of events at all. When the video ended, the attorney let the silence hang in the air for a moment before speaking again. "Today we are formally filing a $3.5 million federal civil rights lawsuit against the city, the police department, and Officer Grant Sutter." Camera shutters fired off in a rapid burst, and reporters began shouting questions over one another, all of them scrambling to file the story before their competitors could. By that evening, the department's carefully managed version of events had completely fallen apart, replaced everywhere by a single, unedited video the public could not stop watching. 4 months later, Sutter sat across from Malcolm's attorney in a quiet deposition room, sweat already forming along his hairline before a single hard question had been asked. The attorney opened a folder and slid the first document across the table. "This is the dispatch log from that night," she said. "It shows the catalytic converter suspect was caught and confirmed 8 minutes before you ever turned on your spotlight. That call went out over the same channel your radio was tuned to." Sutter's jaw tightened. "I must not have heard it," he said, his voice already losing its earlier confidence. "The radio gets noisy sometimes." The attorney didn't blink. She slid a second document across the table, this one pulled straight from the camera company's own records. "This is your body cam's metadata," she said. "It shows your camera was manually turned off 40 seconds before you slammed my client into that shelter. Then it was turned back on right after." The room went completely silent. Sutter stared down at the page, his mouth opening and closing without any real words coming out. I don't remember turning it off," he stammered, his voice cracking halfway through the sentence. "Maybe it glitched." The attorney simply looked at him and said nothing, letting the silence stretch out long enough to make the lie feel even smaller than it already was. Sutter's composure fell apart piece by piece after that. His answers grew shorter, then shakier, until finally he stopped answering questions with anything more than a whisper. By the end of the deposition, he sat completely still, staring at the table, offering no defense at all, because there simply wasn't one left to give. Mediation came quickly after the deposition. Malcolm's demands weren't up for negotiation. $3.5 million, paid in full, with no confidentiality clause hiding the case from public record. Officer Sutter terminated with cause, losing his pension completely. The supervisors, who had ignored years of complaints against him, forced into early retirement, effective immediately. Facing years of federal oversight if they refused, the city signed every term without changing a single word. Sutter was indicted weeks later on federal charges for violating Malcolm's rights and tampering with evidence. He eventually pleaded guilty and was sent to a federal prison to serve his sentence. The supervisors who had shielded his record for over a decade quietly disappeared from the department, their names never mentioned publicly again. Malcolm walked back into his federal office 3 months after the settlement, hung his jacket on the back of his chair, opened a new case file, and went back to work, because that had always been the point. What happened to Malcolm Reeves on a rainy street corner isn't rare. It happens somewhere in this country almost every single night, to people who don't have a federal badge hidden away to even the odds later. The only real difference this time is that the system got caught on its own camera, its own logs, its own recordings, and for once, it couldn't talk its way around the truth. Documentation and quiet resolve did what shouting never could have. If this story made you angry, made you think, or made you want to see more real accountability, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more true stories of justice fighting back.